The immortal Iron Fist has fallen. So, as people probably heard, last week, I think it was last week, I don't know, my days bleed together at this point, talking about this stuff as continually as I do. Not a complaint, it's just kind of what happens. But Iron Fist is not getting a third season. It has been officially canceled. So this is the first of the Netflix series to sort of get this kind of definitive close. Arguably, you could say the same thing kind of happened to Defenders, except that was always kind of positioned as more of a mini-series rather than an ongoing thing. So that didn't so much get canceled. It didn't have to because it wasn't planned as an ongoing season of a show. But they have said that they're not planning to do more like it. So maybe you can count that as two. So let's go over the situation this leaves things in for Marvel Netflix in terms of what shows are left and what may or may not be done with storylines and characters from Iron Fist. Warning up front, I am going to be talking about as much as I know about all of these shows. So if you are not caught up on some of these, I'm probably going to drop spoilers. So that means first 2 seasons of Daredevil, first 2 seasons of Jessica Jones, first 2 seasons of Luke Cage, first 2 seasons of Iron Fist, The Defenders, and as much as I know about what happened in Punisher, because I've said before, I wasn't engaged enough to finish it. I know other people liked it. Great. Sorry, I didn't. But in any case, so Iron Fist gone. That it's very clear they hadn't necessarily counted on that being the case because they did leave some very clear strands that could be picked up at a later date. At the same time, though, it did sort of bring certainly that chapter of things to a close. Now, I've gone on last time I talked about these shows in general, I sort of basically sort of rang the death knell that I really thought all of these were going to be wrapping up soon. And that, honestly, I was probably wrong about that. It's looking like that's not necessarily the case. Because my prediction was that with Disney coming out with its own streaming service, that they were going to wind all these down. But, you know, apparently not yet, at least not en masse. They're going to play them out on a one-on-one basis, or at least that's what it looks like now based off what's happening. So with Iron Fist out, I figured there's 3 characters that we are liable to see again in other shows, and those are actually the 3 who have been in other shows. So that would be Danny Rand himself, the Iron Fist, Colleen Wing, and Misty Knight. If I were to peg where they're liable to turn up, I would say Luke Cage Season 3 would be the most likely. Now, let's be clear, Luke Cage Season 3 has not been announced as yet. It has not been confirmed. So if that doesn't happen, maybe we don't see them again at all, because I honestly think that that's the world and the story that those guys could slot in the most smoothly into without like disrupting everything. But I do feel comfortable in saying we are probably going to get a Luke Cage Season 3, because even though they haven't announced, you know, a date for the new season or, you know, a start of filming or anything like that, not only was it left in a very clear position to set things up for further stories, given the time frame that we got with Iron Fist in terms of when the season closed and when they announced the cancellation, it wasn't that far apart, all things considered. So given how much time it's been since Luke Cage Season 2, I think if they were going to cancel it, we would have heard by now. So even though, as of recording, we don't have a confirmation of Luke Cage Season 3, I'm still expecting it, and that's where I would expect these guys to turn up again, which makes sense on a lot of levels, especially given that Iron Fist himself has been teamed with Luke Cage repeatedly in the comics. So what I don't expect to have happen is something that I have vocalized before that I would like to happen. I would like a Daughters of the Dragon series. I would like Colleen and Misty to have their own show because the chemistry between the two of them is absolutely great, and I felt that their stuff was a lot of the best stuff in Iron Fist Season 2. I'm not expecting that to happen because while I will, again, admit that I was wrong that the Marvel Netflix shows were on borrowed time, I would be shocked if any new shows started up. I suppose it is possible for them to spin off from their own stuff, but I really wouldn't expect them to get any new material to play with because Marvel is going to put that on Disney's own streaming service when that comes out Is it next year, the year after? I can't keep track of this stuff anymore. But I'm not expecting any new shows from Marvel Netflix. I expect them to ride out the ones they have for however long they feel it's appropriate for each of them. So let's look at each of them. Because if I had my way, from a narrative perspective, most of these would be wrapping up with their next upcoming seasons. And I'll talk about this and I'll explain why narratively that's why I feel that would be the best call. Do I think that's what's going to happen? No, but I'll come back to that. So Daredevil Season 3, obviously the one we know the most about, is the one we have a trailer for. So if this is truly going to be the coming to a head of Kingpin and Daredevil, then that kind of, like, one of two things has to happen. Either it's going to bring a definitive end to the Kingpin, in which case, you've burned through the best villain you've got. I mean, I would say the best asset the show had overall. And if it doesn't, and it just leaves it in a hanging situation like, oh no, we're going to stretch this out for more seasons, I think they're really going to risk diminishing returns. And I think they're going to, I think they've got this upcoming season to have the impact of Kingpin versus Daredevil really properly land. And if they just stretch it out for 4, 5, 6 seasons, keeping him around, I don't think fans are really going to care for it. And if they take out Kingpin and keep the show going, it is going to feel a lot like, well, you've peaked already. What is there left to do? And it is unfortunately troubling that it has, again, no seasons have officially been confirmed as happening, but Marvel folks have said that there are at least plans and proposals and outlines for what to do as far as 6 seasons in for Daredevil, which concerns me. Because there's a lot of shows out there that are good shows but should have ended 1, 2, 3 seasons before they did. Like, they clearly hit their peak. Some of them even have what were clearly intended to function as final episodes and then kept going past that. And it very rarely ends up being a rewarding experience when that happens. You're just kind of waiting for it to finish. So, like, that's why I feel like that narratively feels like it should be closing out with season 3. I kind of feel the same about Jessica Jones, which I believe is currently in the process of shooting. And that one is a little less clear cut, but if they are going to build season 3 around the conflict between Trish and Jessica, which would be the logical extension of where they left things off at the end of season 2, then again, that feels like something that you could justify as having, the coming to a head of the last at least 1, if not 2 seasons worth of television. But then it's like, well, where is there left to go after that? Again, obviously there's room for them to set things up, but given what they've made Jessica Jones into, which is not what the comic was, because the comic was very much a, here's the latest case Jessica Jones is working on, and the show is not that. The show is much more building arcs out of her personal journey. And I think that's harder to stretch out over time and have it work. I already personally feel that season 2 was a serious step down from season 1. Nowhere near as focused, nowhere near as polished, nowhere near as clear in what it was doing. Luke Cage, which I already mentioned, it ends in a very Godfather fashion. Luke Cage season 2 did, which to me means we should be setting up Luke Cage season 3 to basically be Godfather part 2. And before you think, well, but there are 3 Godfathers. No, there are not. In any case, I would think that, going down the path of Luke Cage sort of filling the void left by the local crime bosses in Harlem that he is now filling, however he chooses to do that, whether he is just taking this stuff over, whether he's trying to dismantle it from the inside, who knows, we'll see when we get there. But I feel like that again feels like a crescendo. It feels like an ending on a high point. That one, at least from what has been built up in terms of the season that came before, I feel like that one might have the most potential mileage to get a 4th season out of, because if the 3rd season is about him trying to fill this vacuum, however he does it, whether he goes all in on being the bad guy or whether he's trying to, ease things back, again, who knows. If he falls out of that position at the end of that, you could have a crawling back from the fall as a season 4, but again, it depends on where we get left in season 2. The Punisher, this one I have to just go by what I am aware of, because as I said, I didn't finish the show. The thing is, the reason I'm inclined to say season 2 feels, what I know of it, what has been set up, feels like it should be a last season, is they set up basically Frank's only notable recurring villain, which is Jigsaw. Frank doesn't get recurring villains because he kills them. So you can't really have too many recurring villains with the Punisher. Jigsaw's pretty much the only one. And now that they've set him up, they've now got to do that story. And then once he's out of the way, well, what is there left to do? I suppose, depending on what they do with Frank's own development as a character, they could figure out more angles to tackle with him personally. I'm not sure how much more there is to get out of this particular version of Frank, though, if you are going to lead up to him taking on what is in the Netflix version, somebody who is very much from the world he left behind, in terms of being military based and everything else. So it would be a confrontation of not only someone who is a version of his one iconic foe from the comics, but it could be framed, if done correctly, as him confronting his own past and his own history head on, which I think honestly has a lot of potential. Will I watch it? I have no idea. But that again, that feels like a climax. That feels like a ending on a high point. Will any of these end with their next upcoming seasons? Probably not. I mean, again, it'll probably be ratings dependent, and that's pretty much impossible for us to judge because Netflix does not release their streaming and their viewer data. It's not like Nielsen ratings where, you can just look it up. So it's really hard to say. I would say that Daredevil Season 3 is probably going to pull in good numbers. And if it is anything close to a return to form that the first season won, it's going to pull in good numbers and have good reviews. So I can, unless they completely drop the ball and blow it with the introduction of Bullseye and with bringing back the Kingpin, which, given that the Kingpin has been, even in season 2, in like the 1 or 2 episodes he appeared, has been the strongest element in this whole show, I'm not expecting them to drop the ball with him. So unless they do, I would expect we're probably going to get at least a Daredevil season 4, because I am predicting a very strong and positive response to Daredevil season 3. Jessica Jones, I think, is a lot more up in the air. I think that has a very good chance at season 3 being the end because, again, going by my reaction and the reactions of those that I've looked at and seeing general response that I can come across, even people who like season 2 seem to feel that it's a step down from season 1. And I have a feeling that season 3 is going to deliver some diminished returns already in terms of the viewers, because basically, first season was, I know not everyone liked it, but for me it was amazing. And then season 2, not as good. And then season 3 is probably going to have lower numbers because people will have done season 2 and been like, nah, I saw how good the show was going to be. I don't expect it to get any better. And so I think that one has a decent shot at killing it off after season 3. And Luke Cage, I already talked about. But like I said, the question becomes, how long do these things run? And again, copping to the fact that I was completely wrong when I said the entire thing was going to wind down when I made that prediction, it's now clearly on a case-by-case basis, show by show. And I think the ones that have the best shot at moving forward further on down the line are going to be Luke Cage and Daredevil. Daredevil had, I think, the overall the strongest sort of backing from fans, and again, we don't know viewer numbers, but if I were to guess, that probably had the best numbers. Jessica Jones, that first season felt like a real, it had a point, it had a purpose, and the second season didn't pull in the same enthusiasm. So it gives the impression that this show, trying to come up with new storylines, is not going to hit the same really resonant themes that it managed to get in its first season. Luke Cage has a good chance of moving forward because it kind of became a little bit of a mini cultural phenomenon between him being a black superhero, being in Harlem, dealing with on the ground street level problems of a culture that is not always depicted as heroic in crime media especially. So I think there's enough interest in wanting that to really sort of justify the enthusiasm for it. Again, my feelings on the Luke Cage seasons have been mixed. Some people like them more than I do, but I think there's enough goodwill based off just sort of what it is and what it represents and what it could be if it truly, nails it, that will keep that will hold people's interest longer. People will give that one a longer leash, I think. Whereas Jessica Jones sort of, I came away from that first season going, I'm skeptical about even a second season because this was so tight and so focused, so good. And the second season kind of proved to me like, you guys came into this with one clear story about what you were doing, and now you're just kind of throwing stuff together. And I don't know for certain if that was everyone else's feeling, but if that feeling is shared by audiences in general, then I don't think goodwill is going to keep Jessica Jones going past the third season. But yeah, even with Iron Fist canceled, I severely doubt we've seen the last of Danny Rand, definitely, and Colleen and Misty probably, because we don't know exactly what their contracts are like, but I have to imagine there are clauses in their contracts that will enable these shows to keep these characters on the hook for at least some guest spots in some of these shows. Like I said, Luke Cage makes the most sense to plug them into. What I think we will not be seeing as far as leftover stuff from Iron Fist, I doubt we're ever going to see the Meachums again. I doubt we're ever going to get Kunlun stuff again. We're never going to see this friggin' dragon. Duh. And Davos, he's connected to Kunlun. And any lingering stuff about the hand, I don't think we'll ever see again either, because that was basically stuff that, even though some of it had appeared in other shows, especially the hand, it kind of initially showed up in Daredevil, it kind of was the big thrust of Iron Fist. And if they're looking at Iron Fist going, people didn't really go for it, I can't imagine that they would transport those story elements over. The characters, like I said, could be plugged into other people's stories. Lifting those story elements, that ends up taking over a narrative if you try and stick that in someone else's show. So I expect all that stuff to be gone. But Danny, Misty, Colleen maybe, probably going to turn up. Again, if I were to bet, next season of Luke Cage. But that's sort of my ramble and my thoughts on the current state of Marvel Netflix in the wake of the cancellation of Iron Fist. What are your thoughts on it? Whatever they are, drop something down in the comments. Let's talk about it. There's a whole bunch of stuff that you can do because there's buttons and there's links, including one to a Patreon. If you feel like supporting me in that way, that would be awesome. But you know what? If you don't want to, don't sweat it, because at the end of the day, you are the council and I just run the meetings. And until next time, this council is adjourned.